Good morning, Pixies. Hello again. We're back with another YouTube video. My voice is super raspy because this is what I sound like when I first wake up in the morning, and I felt like I should get this done before I go live. So here we are. Also, quick reminder that we do have a fashion frame captura contest. I'll have the Google form in the description down below, but if you're at all interested, please enter. There are prizes. It's open to all platforms. And now let's get on with the video. Today we're going to be talking about Yareli and her current state, what I think is wrong with her, how we can improve her, and why I think that the release has been so tumultuous, shall we say. So to start, I think it's really important to go over what Yareli is, and I think that's part of what the issue is. And the fact that Yareli doesn't really feel like she has an identity in the sphere of frames. She, on paper, kind of follows the same sort of formula that Warframes have had for a while now, and that is some form of control, some form of reduction or buffing, some form of damage, and then some form of either secondary CC or buff or damage. That being her first ability, which is obviously CC and is the most solid in her kit right now. Her second being the survivability, which is Marlena. The third ability, which is supposed to be some form of secondary CC and damage. And then her fourth ability, which I think is supposed to primarily be damage, since the CC portion of it is negligible. That's where we run into problems, because on paper Yareli is like a pizza, a cheese pizza, one that, like, you know, it's fine, it'll work, it gets the job done, you fill your hunger, but like, that pizza could be better. It's just foundational. Like, you could add some toppings, you could do some fun stuff with the crust, and it's just basic. And that's where Yareli is right now. She's just basic. She's just a cheese pizza. And a cheese pizza that doesn't seem to consider some really glaring problems and has some issues with synergy. So the main issues that I think Yareli has currently is A, scalability, B, identity, and C, synergy within the kit. So just talk about the scalability. Right now, her damage numbers are really not warranting buffs, and I think that has to do in part with the identity. When I looked at her when she was first showcased, I thought that she was supposed to be a CC tank frame, something that would be able to strategically place traps, strategically utilize her 1 and her 4 to make the most out of her passive and her Marlena by buffing her damage with her passive and getting kills that way. Not that she was meant to be able to kill per se with her abilities. So far it kind of seems like that's where they're trying to go, though of course that's just saying based on the buffs thus far, and these are only the first buffs, and frankly I don't expect these to be the last ones, because again, there's more to be done. So in terms of scalability, the ability that has the most issues is Marlena, the second ability. On base star chart, you're not going to have issues with this, I don't think. She'll perform fine. But when you get into Steel Path, and especially if you're doing any sort of endurance or sustained content with scaling enemies, you quickly discover that Marlena does not perform. And this is because, unlike other abilities in this similar vein as Marlena, which is a sort of HP pool that you use to deflect damage or negate damage or remove damage, she doesn't have that. For instance, Iron Skin from Rhino has a base like Iron Skin pool, but then when you activate it, you have a split second, a second or two, I don't actually know the exact amount of time, that you can stack on top of that to have a higher shield. This allows it to scale in other forms of content because you're able to take the damage and convert that damage into more Iron Skin. Marlena just has the base HP, whatever your strength modifier is, then that's what your HP is at. And that's where it'll stay, it can't go any higher. Yeah, you can recast the ability, but the ability becomes useless if you get one shot. because the damage is so high, and you can't scale up her damage reduction either. So it's a flat 75, and you're at a flat whatever you put your strength at. And the thing about not about Marilena, the thing about Yareli is it's weird because I don't really want to have to invest so heavily into strength for something like survivability on her, because when I look at her kit, I feel like I should just have to deal with primarily duration, maybe a little range, and just like a modicum of a strength at most. But because of Marilena, because of how stagnant she is, I feel like I have to put in more to make that work, except for the fact that it doesn't work, because the content that I'm doing is the type of content like level caps, like endurance, and these things, if you go more than an hour in Steel Path, Marilena falls off drastically. I don't want Marilena right now. And not just for this reason, but I don't want Marilena right now. I'd rather just subsume Gloom and utilize that instead. So that's the first issue, scalability. The 4 also has similar issues in the sense that the damage numbers are already pretty low, and yes, they'll increase based on the amount of enemies suctioned, but even then, the damage isn't significant enough to really warrant use. Steel Path enemies would take so many tries to get them to die. It's like, just use your weapon. And that's fine, like that's fine, if that's what it is. But then the 4 needs to be switched in some sort of way so that it can be warranted more as a CC and not as a damage tool. The damage, again, I think base Marilena as she is going to be fine for base Star Turret. You're probably not going to run into any of these issues. You're going to run into these issues when you're trying to use her on Steel Path and the like. And this brings me to the next topic, which is identity. Yareli has a confused identity. She's built like someone that is supposed to control and then utilize her mobility on and survivability and her passive on Marilena to deal damage using this control that she has by utilizing the 1, by strategically placing the 4, by using her 3, which is mostly as I believe it's meant to be like a last line of defense type ability, but doesn't quite do that either. And so when we end up with this scenario, it kind of is, which way are we supposed to be going here? Is she supposed to be going down this CC control route? We got a buff to the 3's duration yesterday. We got a buff to the amount of bubbles we can cast at a given time on her first ability. And we got changes to the elemental type, the damage type, which certainly helps a little bit. But again, the numbers are so low that felt kind of meh, even with the buffs to the damage and the scalings. And so I think part of the issue is going to be finding the answer to that question. Which way is she supposed to go? Is she supposed to be a damage frame with control, or is she supposed to be a control frame that utilizes weapons? If it's the second one, then we have issues again with Marilena, because on Marilena, the ability that seems to synergize with everything else in her kit, or it's supposed to, as this allows her to freely cast, as this gives her mobility, as this makes her passive really easy to maintain, only allows you to use secondary. And we understand that her passive only affects secondaries, but it feels really bad to be regulated to just one weapon type when her damage doesn't justify that. Like, if her damage was higher and I could just kill things with the 4 and then, kill things with my secondary, that'd be one thing, but I can't kill things with my 4. I can't kill things with my 3. I can't kill things with my 1 on Steel Path. I'm stuck with my only a secondary, but then we have like Arcane Dexterity, which is, all about switching between melee and your gunplay, and then I'm stuck having to only use one thing in my arsenal, which feels counterintuitive to the fact that when all of these new changes to the Arsenal Divide were brought up, it was to bring in more diversity. In her current state, she kind of feels like a side grade Zephyr mixed with Naja. Her 4 is a worse Tornadoes. Her passive is a downgraded but slightly buffed version of Zephyr's passive, but a little bit more consistent. So, honestly, her passive is fine. I don't have an issue with her passive. And her survivability and control, which Zephyr honestly has, is just pretty much a chakram mixed with iron skin, except it has no scalability. And I think actually looking at the Zephyr is a really good place to start, because Zephyr also is a frame that is primarily a CC frame in terms of abilities, but with how the abilities function, allows her to utilize gunplay, or other weapons, but primarily gunplay, to a very, very high degree that allows her to still feel really, really good with damage. Also, we should look at Titania. Titania is the other frame that utilizes a sort of underused mobility tool, Arcwing, but does it in a way that is synergistic, that doesn't feel like we are being stuck in a unfortunate situation. You're able to use all the abilities you want, you're able to mobilize how you want. She has her own exalted weapons, and both of them feel good, even though, I mean, I primarily use Dexpixia, I think we all do. And then we have Yareli, who, in a similar vein, is only utilizing K-Drive and synergizes with K-Drive, but then utilizes it in a way that is counterintuitive, because even on normal K-Drives, you can at least use primary. So the fact that we can't even switch to a primary without getting off of Marilena feels really bad. And if she's what VentKid's base K-Drive's on, why can't we just use melee? Why can't we use all of her weapons and utilize our entire arsenal while also utilizing Marilena? Third thing is Helminth, and that is, again, Marilena doesn't synergize with Helminth very well, because you can't use Helminth abilities when you're on Marilena, unless they are a pre-cast ability. So you'd have to cast the ability, it would have to, sustain itself, and then you'd have to get off Marilena and recast. Or you'd have to cast the ability, and it would have to just channel, like Gloom. So you can't, recast on Marilena. You have to get off and get back on. And that also is something that I think feels really bad. Lavos is the thing where if you subsume an ability off of him, then you can't keep that elemental type, but Lavos' kit feels strong enough by itself that that's fine, because I don't feel the need to Helminth, and I think that's fine if there's a Warframe that doesn't feel like they need Helminth. I don't think it ever should be a need that you have to use Helminth. It should be a tool that allows us to be more specific with playstyles that we want to incorporate and use, but if Warframes are fine, then it should also be valid that we don't use Helminth. What I'm proposing now are going to be the following buffs that I think will put her in a direction. Obviously, this is my opinion, this is what I would personally like to see from Yareli, and I think could work well, and is a version of her that utilizes the base kit that we already have, and just tweaks it so that the player have more control, and she has a more distinct identity that utilizes the things that are in the kit, but allow flexibility in terms of playstyle, so that if there's an aspect of the kit that we don't want to use primarily, or use it more sporadically, then we can still do so. The first thing is her first ability, and that is Sea Snares. Sea Snares, I think, is mostly fine. Again, it's my favorite ability on the kit so far. All I would like is a press hold option for the ability, and this is so that we can either choose between using 1 bubble or doing the default cast of 5 bubbles. The ability is described as something that allows you to set traps. The problem is we can only have 15 Sea Snares up at a time, and if the ability has scaled up to being 5 per, that means you can do 3 casts before you are out of luck. And so the other thing is, by utilizing a press hold type mechanic, then we could have the option to strategically place singular snares across rooms, and also have the option to free cast in the default way of the 5. And this would give us better ways of utilizing that ability for that trapping control. The second ability, Marilena, I've already sort of discussed, and the buffs that I would propose would be ideally letting us use all weapons on Marilena, not just secondary. The passive can stay the same, it's not a big deal. We understand that if we want to utilize the passive, then we just use the secondary, but being unable to switch on Marilena feels really bad, and it feels counterintuitive to her survivability. The next aspect is the scalability of Marilena, which I've already mentioned in the video, and that is allow her to scale. Treat Marilena like Iron Skin, have the base value that we have, but also allow it to scale based on damage taken with some sort of multiplier attached to it. This will work better and allow her to scale better in endurance settings. Third thing is, I would personally like it if ability strength affected the damage reduction on Marilena. If we could get a 90%, I think that would feel really, really good. And also better justify the need for higher amounts of ability strength. Because right now, it just doesn't feel very worth for me, because I really can't justify using Marilena. The third ability, there's a few different ways I think that this ability can go. If they are adamant about not giving us scalability to Marilena herself, one small safeguard that we could potentially introduce would be allowing the slash procs every time an enemy is staggered, or something along those lines, to get some sort of heal that will replenish the HP on Marilena while Yareli is riding her. Another way that we could potentially go about increasing the 3 is, again, I don't think damage is needed, but giving it another form of soft CC or control or survivability. So this could be in the form of evasion, increased evasion while blades are going because, I don't know, deflection rates or something, or deflection, so bullet deflection, X amount of chance to deflect bullets or attacks off of the range. So it would be sort of like turbulence, be sort of like Zaku passive. Third option would potentially be a sort of damage reflect, similar to the new mods for the Robo Puppies, where X amount of damage is taken and then X amount of damage is returned back at you. So then there's some scalability with the ability if you want to use it, if they want to keep it more in a damage line. This way, the low damage could potentially become more viable because it's going to be multiplied based on the damage that goes through, or staggers, or whatever, what have you. So there's a few different ways I think the 3 could be improved and would still give synergy to the 2, which would then give overall survivability to Marilena. The fourth ability, I like the idea of, but honestly, I'm like fine with the fourth ability, except for a few things. One, the animation lock feels really, really bad. I understand that everything in the kit is meant to synergize with Marilena, because when you're on Marilena, you're allowed to free cast, move, and cast abilities at your leisure, and by removing that capacity, then it makes it a little less needed to have that as part of Marilena's kit. However, the fact that you are just completely locked feels just really, really bad if you're not on Marilena. And like I mentioned, if you're staying longer than an hour in Steel Path, you're probably not really going to be able to use Marilena, period. And the fact that Marilena is going to become just like a cast for the 4 is just not good. I think the 4 should be moved in a more CC direction. So a longer duration, a longer time of being sucked, wider range, potentially make it deployable more than once, and allow us to interact with the bubble itself. So duration would affect how long the suction lasts, and after the initial animation, then we can shoot through it, we can use abilities through it, etc. So that it becomes more of a tool that it complements the first ability as another option of control. Either that or the damage needs to be just shot through the roof. It needs to get some sort of scalability, because right now it really just doesn't work on Steel Path for either purpose. It doesn't really clump very well. Like, I'd rather just, if I wanted to clump, I would rather just subsume Entangle or Larva on. It doesn't really do damage very well. If I want to kill anything with just her 4, it's gonna take a while. So having some way to interact with the 4, I think, is definitely necessary. Also, I've clearly not really edited this, so sorry. Anyway, that's my video. Hopefully you enjoyed, and hopefully someone hears this and potentially uses some of this to make her a better frame. I really want to like Yareli. I think she's a unique concept, and I like unique concepts. I just would like her to be a more viable concept, and one that doesn't feel so frustrating to actually play with. So obviously this is my opinion on what it could be, but just based on what I've observed through the community, it seems that generally speaking, Yareli is not well liked, and I would like her to be liked for more than just being a cute frame. So that's the video. If you did like it, feel free to follow. Don't forget about the capture contest. Hit us up on Twitch where you can have more discussions like this, and I'll see you in the next one where I'll probably talk about farming the new Sisters of Parvos. Bye!